Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Imagine for me, if you will, something so powerful that it caused an entire generation to think that their only worth is in what they have with their bodies and what they give to their future spouse. And multiple generations after that. But wait, you don't have to imagine that's called purity culture. Just so we're all on the same page about the definition of purity culture, it is the idea that sex is for after marriage, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that anything that leads to sex before marriage is wrong. Largely taught within the church, really coming to the height of its popularity in the 90s and 2000s. Purity culture shaped the way so many people knew themselves, knew their bodies, knew their relationships, and knew their worth. You didn't have to be in the church to be a victim of purity culture, though. And I think that's really important for people to understand. If you ever took an abstinence-centered sex education class, that's a result of purity culture. If you ever were told, keep your legs together, then you just won't get pregnant, that's a result of purity culture. If you weren't given education in general about what sex is, about what sexuality is, and about what that means for you, also a result of purity culture. If you've ever been told that it's unprofessional for a woman to wear a sleeveless top in a workplace, or that there's certain parts of the body that need to be covered up in order for a woman to be respected, that's also purity culture. One of the more concrete vehicles of purity culture instruction was the book that was published in 1997 by Joshua Harris called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. For many people who were teenagers or young adults, or people in charge of teenagers like youth pastors, during that time, that book changed the landscape of how dating and sex and pairing up in general was looked at. Joshua Harris took this idea of courtship that largely been within the more conservative Christian circles and made it more mainstream. I mean, he went on secular mainstream talk shows to talk about his book because it was such a bestseller. And yeah, a lot of people were making fun of the idea of courtship versus just dating and meeting people. It's still getting the information out there. And it made courting a much more attractive option for the evangelical church than it had been previously. So let me just tell you what's inside the book, right? Just in case you didn't read it. I kind of hope you didn't read it. But just in case you didn't, or it's been a while since you read it, let's get a refresher. Some of the more important themes are, as a young man, you, when interested in a young woman, should go to her father to talk to him about your interest in her. Now, one might think you're going to her father to talk to him about whether or not you, as the young man, are good enough for her. That's bad in and of itself because she's still not getting any autonomy in who she spends her time with. And it's assumed that he knows something about her that she doesn't know about herself. That's bad enough. Here, within purity culture, within this I Kiss Dating Goodbye sphere, it's actually because if you go to the dad, he can be an advocate for you in his daughter's life because he knows her and what's important to her. So he can advocate for you in that way. And then you have a better chance of her liking you when you court her because it's not her permission you have to get to court her anyway. It's his. The interesting thing about the courtship model when it became more mainstream is with the expressed intention of taking the sexual element out of dating and taking that desire for having sex off the table. It actually made appearance much more important because girls and guys couldn't just talk anymore. If a guy was talking to a girl, they were told that it was their responsibility to guard a girl's heart and therefore couldn't talk to her because if you talked to her for too long, I guess, well, girls are soft and malleable and would probably fall in love with you if you talk to her for too long. So you need to guard her heart for her future husband, and you can't speak with her for that long individually unless you're courting her because there's intention there. There's a lot of me that can't believe I'm saying these things out loud still in 2025, but when you can't talk to one another to get to know each other to see if you want to court, your desire to court someone is absolutely going to have to be based on your attraction level to their physical appearance. or to something that they bring to the table. If you know they possess a certain skill because they've used that skill in like your church setting or whatever, or because you know something about their family, you know something about a general quality that is outside of like who they are as a person, because you can't choose to court them based on who they are as a person because you're not allowed to get to know them yet until you've courted them. Which also means that young women are not permitted to essentially have a say in who they find attractive. Because if they look twice at a guy, it's assumed that they are giving him the green light to come calling when she might just be looking at him, right? Another aspect of purity culture as a whole is that it encouraged women to separate their thoughts and their emotions from their bodies and their reactions. So you couldn't demonstrate in any way. You couldn't blush, you couldn't giggle, you couldn't have any of those very natural body responses that were visible to anyone else if you found someone in any way attractive, or you liked talking to somebody, even if you were talking in a group, because it was read into, because you don't have any autonomy or any way to make those decisions yourself, it was read into as an invitation, and you couldn't give an invitation out to too many people because then there was something wrong with you, right? So there's already the message within Christianity that you can't trust your own thoughts, right? Lean not on your understanding. Familiar? And as a woman, you're getting the message that your body is going to betray you, so you can't display anything. You're also given the message that a woman's body as a whole is a temptation to a man, and so you have to hide it. You have to cover it up. You have to not show flesh, because any amount of flesh that's seen is going to be a temptation to a guy, and if you are tempting him, then you are the problem, because why would you cause someone to stumble if you care about them? That was the argument that was made, which makes sense when you're in that headspace. It's almost scary how much sense it makes when you're in that headspace. Can you see how that would get very confusing for somebody? For if you're a woman, you don't have the autonomy, you don't have the ability to respond as your general body would as a whole. Your body is now an enemy because it is dragging people to hell. How do you come out of that with a positive self-image? Like, how would you? The answer is you wouldn't. At least not without the affirmation of someone that you are fitting the roles that are assigned to you. Because that's the next part of purity culture that really enforces gender norms, heteronormativity, gender conformity, and heteroconformity. Meaning, for a woman, you have to fit this womanly character. If you're a man, you have to fit this manly character. And all relationships are heteronormative. They're all man-woman relationships because purity culture left no space for queerness at all, no space for asexuality at all, absolutely no space for transness at all. Like, it was all hetero and cis normative and gender norms that match the sex that you were assigned at birth, because gender and sex are the same thing within purity culture. Within those gender roles, the idea of femininity is pushed on women. The Western idea of femininity is inherently a patriarchal and racist concept. If you don't fit the mold that the patriarchy as a whole, which is Western thinking, has laid out for the feminine shape and the feminine ideals, then there's something wrong with you. You are less than acceptable, and you are cast into side character, other roles that do not have as much importance in the plot. Those side character roles could be really anything. You could be the harlot, you could be the caretaker, you could be one of the boys. In any of those three, though, there is still the centering of the male experience. Because if you're the harlot, you are tempting the men. That's how you get that reputation. If you're the caretaker, you are taking care of the men. Differently from the feminine ideals of taking care of men. If you're one of the boys, it's how you relate to the men. It's still centered, all of it, around men. The Western idea of femininity is centered around men. All of purity culture is centered around men and sex. Because all four of those archetypes, really, but especially any of those three peripheral archetypes, are either oversexed or devoid of sex, one or the other. But they're marked by that. I grew up in the church my whole life, and I'm a queer woman. I worked in the church for a very long time. I'm now a therapist who works with queer relationships, queer people as a whole, and religious trauma. For me, leaving the purity culture mindset was done in degrees because it was a long time before I realized that's what I was doing. It was a long time before I realized that purity culture had its hooks in me as deep as it did, because it's layered into you your whole life. The idea of being the good girl was layered into me my whole life. And when I stepped outside of those boundaries, the ways that I was told that was unacceptable, they weren't always overt statements of I'm not doing the right thing, but they were absolutely always clear in I am no longer acceptable because I'm outside of this very narrow scope that purity culture had for me as someone who is being raised to be a woman. So specifically, I know that the majority of my life I dressed for the male gaze. Absolutely did. And when I realized, which I realized pretty young, that I was also interested in women, I assumed that women were attracted to women the same way that men were attracted to women, because I didn't understand that there would be a difference, because attraction was always sold to me as visual first. I would see it as a compliment if I got catcalled or checked out in now what I would feel is an intrusive and fairly vulgar kind of way. I would see it as a compliment because it was an affirmation that I was doing the right thing, like I was doing the things that were expected of me and made me correct in that male-centric thinking. In my early years when I was a youth pastor, honestly, before I really thought about it or thought it through in general, I had really strict rules about dress code. And then it was a student of mine at one point that was like, why are these rules the way they are? And I didn't have a good answer. So I was forced to really look into myself and look into dress codes and understand how inherently sexist they actually are, and how they are centered around the assumption that guys, men, boys cannot control themselves, and it's women's job to make that okay. And at that point, I decided I wasn't going to be part of any dress code that was going to make a woman ashamed of her body. And it was at that point that I started getting in trouble for bucking the system, but whatever. Learning how to undo those lessons, though, like I said, was a very layered and longer process. Multiple times throughout my teen and young adult years, I had to come face to face with things that I had thought my whole life were very normal and very typical to think, and to be honest, are still very normal, very typical for a lot of my cishet friends to think, because they've never had to, for lack of a better term, deconstruct those assumptions. But honestly, the decentralizing of men was key to my untangling purity culture from my understanding of my own worth and other people's worth as well. I would also submit that the centralizing of men is a large part of why there's so much misunderstanding about the queer community as a whole, because this whole, you're defined by what you do and you're defined by who you're sexually attracted to, actively pursuing sex with. Like, that's not what defines you as far as being a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. Like, that's not the definition of your identity. It might be part of it. It doesn't have to be. But the default assumption is it's about what you're doing in the bedroom. And you know that by people who say things like, well, I don't care what you do in the bedroom, I just don't want to have to see it, or I just don't want to hear about it. I don't know about you, but my queerness has much less to do with what I'm doing in the bedroom and much more to do with who I am as a human. So you can't not hear about it if you're going to be in my life. Like, you can't partake in my life and be detached from my queerness, because it's not something I can remove to interact with you. That's not how that works. But the patriarchy has trained men often to assume that sex is the central character in their lives as a whole, which also, to be honest, I think is not something that has to be true. It's just that is something that's been trained. Because that training is there, then the assumption from that lens of male-centeredness is that everyone thinks like that. And that's just not true. So beyond decentering men as a whole, it is about reconnecting with your body. And that could mean a lot of different things. For some people, it means coming to terms with being on the A spectrum. For a lot of people, that's what it means, because you're told that you have to be a sexual creature your whole life. So you never have a chance to explore that might be true for you, that you're on the A spectrum. And for some people, it means reconnecting with their sexuality and the way their body understands pleasure and receives pleasure. But that all has to happen once you reconnect with your body. And that's a hard thing to do because women as a whole are taught to intellectualize their emotions and their experience. And you're taught that intellectualizing it is processing it. Like, that's how you process your emotions, by thinking about it. That's not actually what processing it means. That might be another video. Allowing your body to feel things and allowing yourself to figure out what it is that you like just because you like it. Those are going to be key points in recovery from the messages that purity culture has given you. Also, finding people that have gone through this too, and you can talk to about it. And in many cases, finding a therapist that understands what recovering from all of this means and how to help people through that. And if therapy is not an option for you, or you're not at that place yet, videos like this one have a whole playlist on this channel about that. But there's also other videos out there on YouTube. There are Facebook groups, Discord servers. Some places have actual in-person meeting groups. You might have friends that have come out of purity culture and religious scenarios that have similar experiences to you. You might not have talked about them yet. Recognizing the things that were pushed on you, and then how it impacted you, and then reclaiming yourself, your physical body, and your mind and your mental processes is how we move through this. And it is work. It just is. And I'm sorry for that, because you didn't do it to yourself in the first place. So you having to do the work now is inherently unfair. And the other option is to stay stuck in it, which is a choice that you get to have. You really do. Because until you're ready to do the work, it's not going to stick anyway. But once you decide to do the work, it's doable. Take it from someone who's done it. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next time. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.